Working for a moving company was never my dream job. It was a means to pay the bills, a job I fell into out of necessity rather than choice. My daily routine consisted of restocking trucks with the supplies they'd need for the day ahead. Boxes, tape, bubble wrap, you name it, I loaded it. The job was mundane, to say the least. Each morning, trucks would pull up to the dock, and I'd methodically fill them up, trying to tune out the cacophony of shouted instructions and clanging equipment around me. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. One particular morning stands out vividly in my memory, and not for any good reasons. I was in the midst of loading a truck, going through the motions with half-open eyes and a mind dulled by fatigue. The early hours had a way of blurring together, and that day was no exception. As I reached for another box, I noticed something odd, a faint blur in my vision. Assuming it was just tiredness setting in, I rubbed my eyes absent-mindedly. That's when I felt it, a strange sensation on my forearm, as if something wet had brushed against it. I glanced down, expecting to see sweat, but what I saw instead turned my blood cold. Hundreds of tiny, crushed baby spiders scattered across my forearm. Horror washed over me as I realized what had happened. My vision hadn't been fuzzy, it had been obscured by baby spiders crawling on my eyelashes. In my tired stupor, I hadn't noticed them until they began to crawl onto my skin. Panic set in as I became acutely aware that I was covered in these tiny arachnids. Without a second thought, I bolted towards the nearest water hose, desperately trying to wash them off. The sensation of their tiny legs and bodies on my skin haunted me even after I thought I had cleaned myself thoroughly. The next morning, I woke up to find my legs covered in tiny, itchy bites, a reminder of the ordeal I had endured. There were no lasting effects beyond the discomfort and the lingering sense of unease. That day marked the peak of my discontent with the job. While I soldiered on for a while longer, the experience served as a stark reminder of just how unpleasant working for a moving company could be. It's a memory I won't soon forget, and a cautionary tale I share whenever someone considers taking on a similar job. Trust me, never work for a moving company, unless you're prepared for the unexpected. I used to work out in the Texas desert in Midland, technically Goldsmith, but anyway I worked out in a warehouse where we shipped drilling motors and collars and other drilling accessories to rigs. Usually it was me and one other dude. Just to set the science, it's 1.5 miles down a desert dirt road to get to the warehouse that's pretty dimly lit, and we'd get there at about 7 in the evening. I'd gotten there around 7 and did the usual, paint the received tools, inventory, then go play Xbox till a night truck would come and I'd either load or unload it. Other dude, James we'll call him, was late all the time, but he was the boss and I didn't really mind the peace and quiet, but never later than 8, so around 9:45 when he didn't show up I tried to call him. He'd gotten drunk and said he'd be in when he felt like it, so I just kept playing Xbox. About 2 a.m. rolls around and I hear one of the side doors open and assumed it was either James, or a driver, but it was a side door that was all the way at the end of the warehouse. I looked out the office window and there was a dude who was not James, and not a driver I recognized. I asked from across the way if he was a driver and homie didn't say a thing, so I assumed it was someone messing with me. Dude looks at me and dead ass says, "Do you believe in Jesus, our Lord and Savior?" The only thing I could think was I guess I'm about to meet him. Thankfully this dude was harmless and just wanted $20. Told me about his heroin struggles and said he just needed $20 for a bus. I think about that night all the freaking time, cause it could have easily been my last. He could have dumped me in the desert and it would have taken days for me to he found. I know this because it happens all the time. Thankfully I've gotten away from the absolute worst part of Texas and have a much safer job. Back in the late 70s, I belonged to a college fraternity that decided to have a charity event. The fundraiser was pole sitting. An alumnus who worked for the utility company came out and dug a hole and planted a real telephone pole in the front yard of the fraternity house. On top of this, the brothers attached an automobile bucket seat because it had seat belts for when we fell asleep. To help with the boredom of sitting on top of that thing all night long, they also attached a table with a small lamp and a telephone. Obviously this was a regular landline telephone with a wire connecting it to the building. I signed up for a late shift that started around midnight. I had a huge appetite when I was a college boy. It didn't take long before I was hankering for a pizza. So I picked up the telephone and called Domino's. After ordering, I asked him to deliver it to the frat house address. He came back with, "It's our policy that we have to have a room number when delivering a pizza to a fraternity house." After I told him that I was not in a room but sitting on top of a pole in the front yard, there was a bit of silence. "Hold on, I have to ask my manager." He put the phone down and came back a half-minute later. "We'll be there in 30 minutes. Within the prescribed time frame, the delivery car arrived. The driver exited holding the pizza high in the air with one hand as if it were a tray, looked up at me and said, "Are you the guy who ordered the pizza?" "Yeah, hold on, I'll be right down," I said. I was shocked when he replied, "No, stay there." My manager bet me $20 I wouldn't do this. Then he started to climb the telephone pole with the pizza balanced on one hand. When he was halfway up, he asked if somebody could come out to take a picture. I telephoned a brother who I figured would still be up. He came outside to snap a photo of the delivery man at the top rung of the pole, handing me a pizza. The manager paid the bet, taped the photo to the wall of the pizza store, and sent a free pizza to the man who sat on the pole for the late shift for the duration of the fundraiser. Which was about 4 more pizzas. I was a newly single mom of 2 small boys on a very long road trip from Oklahoma to visit my parents in South Carolina. After driving most of the night, I needed a coffee pick-me-up and the kids were restless after sitting for hours in their car seats in our little pickup truck, so I pulled up at a gas station/truck stop for refreshments. We are the only customers in the store. After using the facilities, I made the mistake of telling the boys they could pick out their own snacks. I'm carrying my 2-year-old and he promptly points to a Snickers and claims it as his choice. Great! Now for Ryan, the 5-year-old. But wait, now the younger one has changed his mind and wants potato chips. I put back the candy bar and grab a bag of chips. No. Not the blue bag, the green bag. Well, maybe the orange bag. Or the purple bag. Finally settling on a bag of pretzels, I again focus on helping Ryan decide what he wants. The little one starts squirming and has now decided he wants ice cream instead. At this point, Ryan rolls his eyes and asks if he can pick out a box of movie theater candy from the rack near the cash register. I was trying not to roll my eyes too, and give Ryan permission. I tell my little guy that this is his last choice, so we go pick out an ice cream from the freezer. I turn around to see what Ryan chose, and he is gone. The cashier said she didn't notice him leaving. My adrenaline immediately spikes, but I tell myself he is just on the back side of one of the shelves, or had returned to the restroom. But he isn't. He isn't anywhere. I am screaming his name and in a full-blown panic. I run outside, still toting the baby, and the ice cream, and note that there are still no other customers in the parking lot. I am hoarse from shouting and turn to go back inside to call the police, when my son suddenly leaps out from behind a large trash can and literally yells. I am so stunned, upset and relieved that I kneel down and pull him into a 3-way hug with his brother while simultaneously giving him a spanking with my free hand. All the while I am crying that he better not ever do that to me again. He of course starts crying too. Eventually we both calm down and I put on my adult mom hat. I ask him, Ryan, You know we have talked about strangers. Going off by yourself like that could be dangerous. What would you have done if a stranger had come up to you while you were outside all by yourself? He looks a bit perplexed, then proudly responds, I'd tell him not to do drugs. Mom fail. Ryan survived childhood, and is now a Navy pilot. He does not do drugs. In 1986 I had gone with friends to go to Tijuana, I live in San Diego, to go to clubs. I was 17. In Mexico I got separated from my friends during a club fight. I had given my friend my wallet cause I didn't want to carry it. I was never able to find my friends, this was before cell phones, and got a ride to the border. Now I need a ride home to North County, 45 minutes away. I was at a gas station and the attendant told this truck driver I needed a ride cause he was heading to Los Angeles and could drop me off. North County San Diego is off the 5 and right before Orange County. I had tried calling my parents earlier but the phone went to our answering machine, yep, we actually had answering machines, so I had to get a ride. I get in the truck and within a few miles things got out of hand with his behavior towards me. I pretended to be sick, saw this in a movie, and begged to use the restroom. Carmel Valley Road exit was coming up, there was nothing there except 2 gas stations. Can you believe that? And he pulled into the gas station. I got out and walked, normally, into the gas station. I told the cashier that I was being held against my will in a car and that the man was being sexually inappropriate and waiting out front. He grabbed me and stuck me in a cabinet, I'm very small. A short time later the man came in and I heard him say, did a girl come in here? I'm looking for her. I heard the male cashier say casually, no, I haven't seen a girl. He continued to hum and ho while chatting with the cashier. He finally leaves and drives off. 911 was called and 2 policemen asked me the whole way home, are you ever going to do this? They asked to speak with my parents because I was a minor. I was dreading that but little did I know my younger sister had seen the police from her window, had grabbed a sheet, wrapped it around her head and answered the door. The police talked to her, pretty sure they knew it wasn't my mom, and left. What a great sister. Ah, to be young, dumb and stupid. But I survived the 80s. My husband and I were traveling south on one of England's motorways, but as this was about 25 years ago I can't remember which one. The weather was absolutely atrocious, heavy rain was flooding the roads, windscreens were hardly coping, spray from the other carriageway was adding to the misery, as sometimes visibility was practically nil. Driving was very stressful and definitely scary. We decided a rest was needed and pulled into the next service station. Lots of people had the same idea, so finding a parking space was difficult, and inside the cafeteria, empty tables were also scarce. Anyway, we bought coffees and snacks and looked around for a place to sit. I spotted a table for 4, but occupied by just one elderly man. As we headed towards it, a couple rose from the next table, so rather than sitting with the man, we passed him. My husband sat at the empty table, but I remained standing as I unloaded the tray and put our food on the table. When I sat down I was now facing the man, and he suddenly slumped onto the floor. He looked dead. I was in shock, and it must have taken about 20 seconds or so for me to react. I rose, feverishly thinking about how to do artificial respiration, but suddenly someone was kneeling by his side doing what was necessary. Sadly it was in vain. Workers brought some screens and put them around him. It was very upsetting and distressing, but not scary. That came next. We left and headed for the petrol pumps. My husband had just finished filling up when I noticed that there were flames coming out of the bonnet from the car on the other side of the pump. I yelled at my husband, he jumped back into the driver's seat and drove away from the pump towards the shop, that was only about 10 to 15 meters away. He leapt out, dashed into the shop and yelled about the car on fire. I also leapt out and stood by our car. Suddenly a couple of brave, or foolish folk, started to push the driverless car away from the pump, and it was heading straight for me. I was rooted to the spot, terrified, but suddenly 3 workers dashed from the shop with fire extinguishers and tackled the blaze as one of the heroes opened the driver's door and pulled on the handbrake, bringing the car to a stop, only about a couple of meters from our car. We paid and left. The weather was still atrocious, and as we battled on, I just prayed that the saying that accidents or catastrophes always come in threes was indeed merely a saying, and that there was no truth in it. Thankfully we arrived home without further incident, but that, dear readers, was my truly scary day. My friend Doug and I were in my 1987 Mustang 5.0 on Arizona State Route 60 heading back into Phoenix from the small town of Whitman. We had been helping a friend with his 1966 Mustang. We stopped for gas at a cutie. As I was fueling up, a young man approached us and offered to play a song on his acoustic guitar for some gas money. We told him we weren't interested in hearing a song. We asked him where his car was. He pointed to a black BMW X5. We asked why he didn't have any money. He gave some lame excuse about forgetting it at home or at... We offered to put gas in it if he drove it over to the pump I was using. Then there was another excuse why he couldn't bring the car over. We finally called him out for his bullshit. Then we went inside to grab a cold drink. When we came out, he was singing to a couple while they filled up their motorcycle. We took off. Maybe that doesn't seem that weird to you, but he was acting strangely. He didn't really want gas money. He just wanted cash. So, 2 weeks later, my friend Doug is at a gas station with his wife in Phoenix. The same guy approached him with the same offer to play his guitar for gas money. Doug says, "You don't remember me, do you?" Of course the guy did not. Doug told the guitar guy that he saw him at the cutie on Route 60 doing the same bit. The guy refused to admit that it was him. Doug kept on him about it until the guy walked away. That's what made this gas station encounter weird. This was rather a nightmare. I was traveling to United States and was supposed to stay there for a month. Now I thought it would be economical to rent an Airbnb for a month, compared to a hotel. Started looking for property listings on the platform, and came across a very fancy property, new listing, listed as a studio, with separate entrance to your personal space, a kitchen to cook, a living room to chill out, a bedroom, and with a separate bathroom. Pictures portrayed on the listing could literally lure anyone to go ahead with the booking without a second thought. The per-night rates were attractive too, which was next to impossible to believe, but I thought, since it is a new listing, in order for host to win credits at first, it might have been listed with such a rate. I went ahead, and made the reservation and had paid a sum of $1,400 for a stay of 28 days, was pretty excited for my stay. As I said earlier, the property looked appealing. Oh, and did I mention, it also had a swimming pool. Now, comes the D-Day. I arrived at the property, got the keys from the host, and in my full excitement went ahead to open the door, and there you go, boom. The place was not cleaned for ages, I believe. The curtains, sofa, linens, everything were with some weird stains, and the house smelled like a rat. The washroom, I even don't want to go into details. Long story short, the house was crap, and was nothing similar to what it was portrayed in the listing. Oh, and that so-called swimming pools, I believe was for bugs. All the excitement turned into disappointment, and I couldn't stand the sense of being fooled by a platform. With utter disappointment I walked into the host, and raised up the issue, and to my surprise the first reaction from the host was, "It's not possible the place to be filthy," as they had cleaned the place a day before. Now, she was reluctant to walk to the place with me, and just assured me that she will get it sorted soon. I took my luggage, and checked into a hotel, hoping that the host will keep her words. Now, in spite of paying $1,400 in advance, I had to spend that extra cash on hotel, because I couldn't take a filthy place to stay even for a night. I went there the next day and found the place to be in the same condition. This continued for around 7 days, and mind you, the host was utterly dishonest person, who couldn't keep her words. I then decided to cancel my reservation, and asked for the refund, and believing at least Airbnb to help me out here, but I guess I was wrong. I was naive enough for not taking the pictures of the property, which was a biggest mistake from my end. To conclude, I never stayed at the booked property even for a night, but lost $1,400. To some extent it was my mistake, but to warn you, Airbnb clauses is not meant to protect the guest, so be cautious while dealing with them. They made me realize I should have read all the terms and conditions before signing up for anything. Never using them again. Story 6. New York City. The Airbnb host we booked with months ago canceled our reservation a week before our stay. He took all his listings down, so I think his condo found out what he was doing and stopped him. It was 2 weeks before Christmas and NYC was booked. We found a place that looked okay, but had no reviews. That concerned us, but it was close to Union Square Station, so we booked. It was advertised as an elevator building. There was an elevator. It was being installed. The apartment was on the 5th floor. When we got in the dim light, the place looked okay. The host had left a fruit basket and 2 nice bottles of wine. We went out for takeout at a place we knew, ate our dinners and went to bed. We expected noisy due to the location, but we were a half block from a hospital with a very active emergency room. This December NYC was very warm. Like 60s daytime. The hot water heat for the building was set on tropical. Windows open or heatstroke. The next morning I opened the microwave to heat up leftovers. It had been used many times to defrost. From the looks of it, without wrappings or a plate under it. Gross beyond belief. So we adjusted. On Sunday, the Steeler game was on TV, so having been to NYC hundreds of times, we watched it. The remote was so disgusting I used hand sanitizer and a washcloth to hold it to clean it before I used it. I lost an earring down the crack between the cushions and really regretted trying to look for it. We stood up for the second half. Did we contact Airbnb to move? We checked the listings. Nothing with relatively close access to public transportation that would get us into Manhattan in under an hour. We dealt. We'd done Airbnb in Toronto, NYC 3 times not including that one. Did HomeAway in New Orleans/Lafayette in February and NYC in April. Much different experiences. Story 7. I feel obliged here to give some warnings to women who travel alone and decide to stay in Airbnb or any kind of private rentals. Stay vigilant. I was trusting of other people before I had this in. I used Airbnb during my Hawaii trip in December 2015. My overall experience was pleasant until I met host Art O'Connor in the northwest of Oahu Island, where the nightmare started. Like other hosts, he tried to establish rapport with me by talking and sharing his hobbies with me. I was unguarded after staying with him for 2 days. We connected on FB and I revealed my personal information and trip plans to him, getting suggestions and recommendations. So when he offered to meet me in Maui Island, my next stop after Oahu, and to give me a tour while he was there for the holidays, I gladly accepted. I gave him a 5-star review on Airbnb, and I also give him a ride to the airport the day I left his place. However, after meeting him in Maui, he took me to his friend's house in the woods, and sexually assaulted me that night. I was able to get rid of him later and stayed in a hostel the rest of the day. I didn't report this to the police until 1 day prior to my departure of Maui, intimidated by the thought that he might come after me since he knew where I was staying. The story doesn't have a happy ending. Like 90% of sexual assault cases, the detective who was assigned to my case didn't even get statements from the offender or his friend involved in the case, because he said it was a he said she said case. I felt the humiliation and rage I had when I gave my statement describing the details were consumed. In thinking back, it was so obvious that it was premeditated, and I wasn't smart enough to read the hints until it was too late. He made sure that I gave him a good review before he did anything bad to me, so he wouldn't harass any people during their official stays. He asked me to share the expense of a rental car he used in Maui before he did anything bad, for he did not have to assume any economic loss. He acted like a friend and added me on FB, but removed me from FB and blocked my phone number soon after the attack, etc. I would not know he was ill-intended without this experience. As a host, he has a decent job and owns a nice townhouse and a car, doing a part-time master's degree, just like any aspiring professionals I would meet in the city. How could I tell? Moreover, I could not revise my Airbnb review to warn incoming female guests to his place. I submitted a report about the host to Airbnb but never heard back from them. To be fair, Airbnb is just a middleman between hosts and guests. Safety responsibility lies on each individual. Just keep in mind that, if traveling alone as a female, try to stay with a female host or a couple. Airbnb reviews are not always reliable since most of the reviews are 5 stars. It is really hard to use them to screen. Story 8. When my sister and niece left after dropping me off at the Airbnb and getting a tour of her lovely home, my host showed me my room, gave me the keys and basic instructions, along with an inappropriate feeling rash of how terrible family is, and that she'd stopped speaking to all of hers decades ago. Except her daughter, who was off at her first year of college. The Airbnb hosting was a way to help pay for college. All this information was given to me at surprisingly loud decibels, with her face uncomfortably close to mine. I thought, after she'd finally left my room and I began to unpack, hopefully she's just a rambunctious greeter and will calm down. Meanwhile, if that's as bad as it gets, I suppose I can put up with that at this price, in this convenient location, with full use of the living room, kitchen and back patio in the pretty gardens. But that was by no means as bad as it got. It kept escalating. She yelled at me practically every time I dared venture out of my room, for eating out of a bowl that was reserved for guests. What was I, family? Which happened to be the only bowl in the whole kitchen that was big enough for my lunches. I had to provide my own. She yelled at me about having trouble making her house keys work, though she'd warned me when she handed them over that they didn't. She yelled at me for daring to suggest turning on the air conditioner, though she was keeping the house at 83 degrees, 28.3 C. She kept insisting her house had never been too hot for any other guests. I thought better of pointing out that it had just turned hot for the first time of the year around the time I got there, and that this was her first summer hosting. There's no point arguing with that sort of aggression. I just dodged as best I could, reminding myself it wouldn't be much longer. But most of all she yelled about the fan. I sleep better with a fan in my room, for the sound as much as the air, and had borrowed one from my sister to bring over there, asking, of course, if it was all right to use it, before I brought it inside. She assured me it was no problem at all. I had thought I had brought the fan simply for white noise while I slept, but with the house kept at 83 degrees, frankly, I was awfully glad for the air, too. But increasingly, she complained about the fan, as the weather got hotter and she passive-aggressively decreased the amount of time she turned on the AC. One afternoon I intentionally left my fan on when I went out to lunch, knowing I'd be back within an hour or two, and with the room so stifling. When I returned, my room was, yes, stifling, and I saw that she'd let herself in with her key while I was gone, and yanked the fan cord out of the wall while it was running, though the off switch was plenty large and visible. No words necessary that time, apparently. Then she told me her daughter was coming home from college a few days before I was due to leave, and would be sleeping with her, emphasis on the silent since you'll be sleeping in her room. Sigh, I wasn't about to start with her at this stage of the game, only had a few more days. She'd continually broken the contract while I'd been there, by not providing a working key, or proper air conditioning, not allowing me use of the house. In fact, increasingly, I never left my room if she was home, and now she was telling me surprise, for the last half of my stay I'd be sharing the bathroom between our 2 bedrooms not only with her, but with her teenage daughter. On what unexpectedly turned out to be my last day, I was trying to nap in my room as I'd been too hot to sleep much the night before. I was just nodding off when awoken by doors slamming and stomping around. Since it kept going on, plenty loud over my fan on high, I assumed her daughter must have come home and they were doing who knows what, though I'd thought the daughter wasn't due till the following day. When the stomping and slamming went on for 3 or 4 hours and I didn't hear any voices, eventually I realized, oh, this must be a revving up of her aggression. Yikes, I'm not coming out of my room for any. And I didn't, till late at night when I was sure she must be asleep, though I'd had to pee for hours. Then in the middle of the night as I was nodding off myself, suddenly she was pounding on my door and yelling, "No. No. No." I opened the door, a bit bug-eyed, and there was her face in my face, shrieking, "You cannot run that fan 24/7. She complained about the cost of the fan, cost of the air conditioner. May I run it through the night? I peeped, while wondering how to calm the beast for another 2 to 3 days, not long. You may run it 10 hours a day, she bellowed. Okay, I whispered. But, you know, it is increasingly hot in here now that summer's kicked in, I'd be glad to chip in for use of the fan if that will help. That's when she really lost it, kept screaming, "No. No. No. You will be out of here tomorrow. I will not be held hostage in my own home." And here I'd thought it was all a matter of me taking 1,000 deep breaths a day and only putting up with it a while longer. Needless to say, after that fun night, she pounded on my door early in the morning and yelled, "Time to start packing." And pack, I did, and got out, without much doubt that consciously or not, she was kicking me out so she'd have the house for just her and her daughter, as though that couldn't have all been avoided with proper scheduling. This was my first time ever using Airbnb. I'd hate to judge an entire company on one horrific experience, but I can't say I'm tempted to do this again. But anyone looking for a cheap place to stay in a convenient Los Angeles location, with cute dogs, have I got a spot for you. All I ask in return for the tip is that you bring a giant fan. Lovely home in hip Melrose Fairfax district, bungalows for rent in Los Angeles, California, United States. This account, which doubles as my official review of her on the site, leaves out her darling dog. After her seeing for the first day or two how much they enjoyed my company in my room, she kept them caged rather than allow us a minute to